Hello, this is Alekius, and welcome back to Sprocket tutorial series. We're back at the ATG-5 V6, 12.5 ton tank currently, and we're looking at tracks today. Now, we did the rough shape of the tank and cannon, we did the engine, transmission, and the suspension, and we will make tweaks to those as needed as we continue on. The tracks may have a very important role on the tank. So let's get rid of the fenders so we can get a better look at the geometry. Better look at the geometry of the tank. That was going to bother me. The geometry of the tracks. Now, first, track width. Default 0.4 meters. You can see, can go very wide, can go very narrow. The length of the individual links, for which I will shift to the rubberized, because it makes it very obvious what that is. That is the length of each link. For this one, I'll go to the older one, or the slatted. Thickness. How much it can bite into that ground. These all have factors. Track width spreads out the ground pressure for the tank. So if we want 12.5 tons, what's the footprint of this track? How many pounds per square inch, or the metric equivalent, is that? That matters for how much it sinks into the mud and how much traction you can get. Length of the links, other than aesthetics, I'm not sure what the advantages and disadvantages. You have more biting teeth, bites fewer. So I would almost be inclined to say you want the shorter ones, don't you? That and it looks like a porcupine anyways, so it's great, right? But I'm sure there are disadvantages, and I will admit my ignorance of those at this time. And if I find out, I will fix that. Thickness, that's all about biting into the ground. Sprocket. Forward is just moving it back and forth, and then important for the housing. Height is just how high it is above the ground. Is it ground? No, it's for some value for the base. Base? What is 0 at? Center of it being flush with the bottom of your lower. So that is what it is based off of. Put it at 0.27 because that brings it nice and straight across. And then diameter. I do not have tips on optimizing Sprocket, or the idler for that matter, as long as they're big enough to handle the links appropriately. You have that is not handling that appropriately. Again, forward, height, diameter. There are a couple of other settings for which I will remove our road wheels so we can see them better. We have spacing on axle. That's just how wide it is. How much space is between. This is easier to see with the road wheels. Spacing on axle. Now, per axle. Again, easier to see with the road wheels. And so we can accommodate those ultra wide tracks and keep them touching the ground. Idler, I also do not have a recommendation at this time. Other than keeping it a little bit wider helps the track to glide across the wheels a little bit better. But if you want some pizza cutters, you can do that too. For now, I'll do something like that and leave the idler alone for the most part. Now the road wheels. Already showed interleaved, which historically I think was more like that. You see it goes right in between the teeth. Advantage, this gets a nice even pressure all the way across the track and doubles or nearly doubles the amount of torsion bars you have. Disadvantage, very heavy. There is the interleave overlap rather than spacing, and that just shows how much the wheels are overlapping each other. Now if we bring these back down, leave a little bit of a gap between them. We have a few extra settings for the road wheels. We have per group. Well, now I have 2 per group. What is that for? We have a pair of wheels back and a pair of wheels forward. And that allows for certain designs that you saw historically. Per group, per axle. Now, if we look at weight, we can see that tracks make up almost a third of the tank's weight. Oh, return rollers, before I forget. Forward moves them forward, starting with whatever is at the back of the tank, whether it's the sprocket or the idler. Height above ground, diameter of the idlers, which we don't have a lot of flex room on, spacing on axle, which we saw, per axle, spacing, we saw how all that interacts. Let's lower that back down, maybe not quite as far, we'll leave it a little bit higher. Now, I said I don't have recommendations for the sprocket or the idler, other than that I personally like a rear sprocket because it's more protected. Unless you have very heavy armor up forward and you can hide the sprocket inside the armor. That makes it a little harder to get. Basically, you have more overhang up here before you have track that hits the ground. Yeah, I could space this wheel forward, but it's still, there's less room than there was before. Forward height, put you at the same height as the sprocket, even though your diameter is a little bit less. I would focus on the spacing on axle and width for the idler, whatever you're looking for. My focus normally is on road wheels and track dimension. Return rollers, I would handle it aesthetically. There are advantages, but we're looking at a basic to intermediate tutorial, not a super advanced into how tracks travel across. Like, if I eliminate the rollers, this is actually kind of cool. The game does this. You'll see the track geometry shifts a lot more. And if you really get going, you'll get ripples like you see in a jump rope when you shake it. It might be easier to see if I... But let's leave the spacing the same. Just move it forward. And you'll see it with this. Should. Oh, not so much actually. This tank handles its tracks pretty well. You can get those ripples or pinching. I think it's really cool that the game models that. Whether it has an effect on the actual tractive effort of the track, I think so, but I haven't done enough testing to confirm it yet. So, what do you want with tracks? How I approach tracks. I start with width. Now we have a good tank. But let's try removing some of the width. And it still zips along quite nicely. And I try to minimize width because it weighs so much. So yeah, it's handling pretty well. Seems to be moving a little bit faster. Now the question is, when we get to these hills, and I'm not steering, I have not pressed left or right at all. The tank is steering itself, based on how much traction it's receiving on the left and right tracks. It seems fine on the hills. Like, I'm not going to be able to climb a significant hill. Like, this might be too much of an effort. As long as it goes over at an angle, it seems fine. So we can get away with a thinner track. If we go down to a minimum, well, one, I'm going to eliminate the extra idler and road wheels. Oh, I did steer a little bit at the beginning just to get past the first tank. And it also still seems to be handling just fine. I'm a little concerned about its ability to climb because we're losing traction. But it actually seems to be doing fine. I might compromise and do, say, a 0.25. I do want a little bit of ability to get up and down. Turn rollers. Why don't we remove the extra? Nah. Need to remove the width. So the teeth go between them. That looks reasonable. Bring it down to 0.1. Now, if we keep per axle of 2, and we get in here, you can see the road wheels go between the tracks right there. Increase the spacing just a little bit. Now, is that appropriate? Can we get away with 1? Yes. Yes, we can. And we're not seeing the tracks move around too much. Change the width. Don't really see, like, if they were actually like this, we would want a slot in the middle. Just to save weight, I would recommend normally doing 2. Not worrying about the spacing, other than having it be fairly low, 0.01 or 0.02. And just having it so that the wheels cover that outer segment. This has a slotted outer segment. This has a toothed outer segment. This has a flat outer segment. Kind of bringing the width to that point. That's going to put weight down on the width of usable track, if that makes sense. So this wheel is touching all of this track area, the full width of the track. That's important. So if we go and test this out, nice and clear. Tank's cruising along, 17 kilometers an hour. Picking up speed, passing by our buddy. Going around that hill. Maneuverable, flexible, handles reasonably. All around good. I think the tracks are narrow personally, but it works. If we remove one and minimize the width, we have pizza cutters now. They still apply pressure, but only to the inside of the track. Oh wow, got our engine first shot. Only to the inside of the track. And that limits our tractive effort, but it's lighter weight. Oh yeah, we're maxing out our speed there. Gonna do damage to our engine. Oh, actually I made it over the hill. Is that heavy? Oh yeah, that is like a... that is quite a bit of weight. And that's what you're going to see is the track segment and the armor segment are going to dominate weight most of the time. Now, if you want to balance things out, well, let's go over when you use thickness. The terrain is particularly muddy. Let's do this. 1/1000, 2/1000. Well, no, can't do it here. I'll have to go to the sandbox to get an accurate. But you see about how fast we're traveling. Or accelerating. Smack that out. It's going to be way heavier. But it gets up to speed a bit faster. Those teeth are just tearing into the ground. Theoretically, should make hill climbs easier too. So that's a balance you have to reach depending on what you're trying to achieve for mobility on the tank. Get up there. Can't quite get to the top. Have to turn and go around. But it accelerates faster, which is the factor I'm usually looking for when I'm adjusting thickness. You'll also accelerate faster with more track width. Again, bigger footprint, more square footage touching the ground. And that's what the main wheels are doing. So if you wanted to maximize how much touching the ground, you can interleave wheels to get that there. Just make sure you're also adjusting the suspension when you do so. I'm not going to at this point. But we get decent acceleration there. Not as good because we made the tank heavier by having twice as much suspension and twice as many road wheels. Well, actually it's the same number of road wheels. Slightly less. We have 16 rather than 20 because we had 2 on each axle. You can also make the road wheels very tiny, but that gets you very little ground clearance. But all of those wheels and suspension systems are touching the ground, keeping the track intact with it. And you can see how that performs. I went with rather large road wheels. What were they? 7.5, I think. Lose the interleave, add the second wheel, and we're back to the tank that we had. Hopefully that makes sense. I know I don't have all of the answers for tracks at this time, but that should give you an idea of how to tweak it to get the tank to achieve the mobility that you want. Tell me if you agree, tell me if you don't agree. I'd love to hear about it. Appreciate you staying to the end of the video, and I will see you all next time. Take care, everyone.